Recording. Oh, hello everyone. Hope you can hear me, see me. Oh, can you hear me? Because I can't hear anyone else. I hope that's not a technical issue. All right, so, well, some of you can hear me at least. So let's start. Good morning. It's morning here in Wellington. And thank you all for joining this webinar. It's a bit of an off topic, so we're not actually going to talk about how to do stuff with Totara, but just give you some ideas on how you can make your own trainings or digital products or whatever a little more appealing or fun to use, or if you want to use that word, addictive, maybe, not in big malicious way, but just by adding the small details that make it more gratifying or maybe a little bit fun for the users or learners or whoever your audience is. So let's see how I can bring up my deck and start the show. So I'll just go through my slides and talk about the principles behind making your digital experience more well, addictive. There's that word again. And I'm sure people will want to ask questions or start a conversation on that. My suggestion is to hold all these ideas and bring them later on our community forum, where we will be able to give much more detailed and in-depth answers, and obviously add links to other resources and articles. So I think it will be a lot more meaningful if we do that later on. But do hold on to your questions and share them, because I think there's a lot of ideas that can come out of this webinar and the discussion later. So here we go. But oh, sorry about that, just a minute. Oh, okay. So if I want to share, then this one. All right. Yeah, so I hope you can see my screen now. Design for Habit. As I said, how to build digital products. And in my view, when you build, when you create a learning online course or learning plan or whatever, that's in a way also a product. So I think the same principles can apply there as well. And as I said before, just I think it'd be better if we take the discussions and questions for later, so we can really get more value out of it. And sorry, I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Ran Gilboa. I'm UX designer at Totara, working in our Wellington, New Zealand office, part of the ever-growing UX design team that we have here. And actually, if you get a chance to see our latest release, Totara 12, which just came out, I think, a few days ago, there's some features that I was involved with there, and probably we'll get to talk about them then another time. So yeah, let's just start. These are all commonly used tools, products, games. I'm sure all of you know at least a few of those. And they all have some principles of addictive elements added to them, which in part makes them so successful in what they do. And maybe you are aware of that, maybe not, but each of these products is in its own way a little bit, or more than a little bit, addictive. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not so good. I'm not going to point fingers at anyone, but you probably can guess that for yourselves. So let's look at how the people who built these products did it. And start by understanding some basic ideas of how the human mind is built, how we interpret the world around us, and how it can be used or exploited to make addictive products. So it all starts with understanding behavior. And well, there's a definition of what a behavior is in very basic details. And then if you have a behavior that is repeated regularly, then it can turn into a habit. And a habit, what it means basically, it's something that you can do without having to think about it too much. So it's kind of becoming like a second nature, some people say. Like when you ride your bicycles, you don't, after the first few times when you learn how to do that, you don't really have to think about it again. You just get on the bike and ride, and you're not falling or crashing into things because you don't have to think about how you do it. That's a habit. And of course, there's the dark side of habits, which is an addiction. And addictions are the kind of like habits, but unlike a normal habit, which will have some benefit for us in our daily lives, an addiction will abuse the same mental or cognitive mechanism of habit forming to create something that will actually be detrimental to you, will maybe cause you to risk your health or jeopardize your social connections or lose money. But it will be gratifying, and that's actually why some people tend to fall into addiction. And some products will try to encourage that. And of course, we're not talking about, well, we're not talking about making this type of products, but it's out there and it's something to be aware of. And it all starts with how we interpret or understand the world around us. So, and this is true for humans and also for many other creatures that were studied. And it seems that the same principles apply to most of us. And one of them is the way our mind understands what we see with our eyes. And for instance, this image, which some of you probably have seen before, it's quite famous, but some people will see a duck, some people will see a rabbit. It depends on the context or on the angle or many other factors. And then if you go a bit deeper, then again, when we look at the world around us, we kind of automatically, we don't have to think about it, but we identify things by recognizing patterns. So for instance, again here, you can see a cup, you can see two silhouettes, two faces. Probably both answers are correct. And about 100 years ago, a group of German psychologists identified these mechanisms and gave them the title Gestalt theory, which they later applied in many different areas. But I think what's interesting for us here is really the visual principles that were identified of how we see things. So for instance, if we see elements around us, we will automatically identify them and group them according to these principles of, these are just some of those principles, proximity, similarity, continuity. For instance, we see these lines and we can automatically decide that they are connected, although maybe they're not, we don't know. We identify symmetry, closure. We can see, all of us can see the triangle in the middle, where in fact there's nothing there. It's just three circles with holes in them, or however you call it. And so that's one way that we interpret the world, through patterns. And then these patterns go to a more, to a deeper level in how we, again, build the world, the image of the world around us by applying associations. And yeah, well, obviously, when we look at pizza, it brings a whole group of associations to mind. And the interesting thing is how we approach them. So obviously, I think for most people, a pizza would be a positive thing to look at or think about. And then we give it meaning. We think about how nice and tasty and satisfying it would be to take a bite of this pizza right now. But then it also makes us feel all those other feelings about ourselves. And this is something that was done was tested on people many times in different situations where they showed them something that was desirable or desired, and people generally respond the same way. So they will apply positive associations on the object and then negative ones on themselves. And that's, again, something that can be used when we're looking for ways to make more appealing products or experiences. Because this leads us to the mental pattern of problem solution, which is how we deal with a lot of the things we have to respond to during our daily lives. And again, we do it automatically. We don't usually stop to think about it, but you see something, you automatically try to identify the problem in it. And of course, when there's a problem, it causes pain. Pain doesn't necessarily mean like a physical or agonizing pain. It can be just discomfort. Like you see someone on the street with a cup of coffee in their hand, and you realize you haven't had coffee since the morning, and then you want coffee. That's pain. That's a very small pain, but it gives you a little bit, your stress hormones are elevated, you feel a little bit anxious maybe, you feel discomfort. And then, of course, you will look for a solution. So the solution could be just to get up of your chair and go make yourself a cup of coffee. But by doing that, you will actually reach catharsis, as it can be referred to, which is problem solved. So you feel good now. You managed to solve the problem. You feel a little bit euphoric, maybe comfort. So going from negative feelings when you have the problem to positive ones when you have the solution. And we can identify these 4 stages in interaction with products, and then use them to lead the user through this cycle of behavior where you create, or there is a problem which triggers an action. Action leads to a reward. And if you repeat that enough times, you will form a behavior which can then turn into a habit. And it can be on a very small scale. We're not talking anything major here. And just a little bit background on the science behind these statements. So here we see a very well-known experiment done by B.F. Skinner, one of the founding fathers of behavioral psychology, who did a lot of experiments in the 1940s and 50s on lab animals, rats, pigeons. It turns out later on he was accused of doing some of these experiments also on his baby daughter. I'm not sure if that was true. But what we see here is actually just an experiment that tried to establish the rules of operant conditioning, where every time the light went off, the pigeon expected to find something tasty in the window. And sometimes there was a reward, sometimes there wasn't. And he identified some principles of how the pigeon connects or associates the light that goes off with the food that appears in the window. And in this particular experiment, that idea was to show the creation of what he called superstition. When the first time that the light went off and there was food, the pigeon was turning around. And so it assumed that this is what caused the light to go off and the reward to appear, which of course wasn't true, but that's how the pigeon interpreted the situation. And so it kept walking in circles, waiting for the reward to show up. And that's one example of how this behavior was formed. And then later on, and we're going now, I think, to the 2000s, his work was expanded by other researchers, including this one. I don't know if I'm, oops. Well, this guy is Hungarian-American psychologist, MIHALY, CSIKSZENTMIHALYI. But I want to go back to BJ Fogg first and talk about his chart of how to help users build behavior, where he talked about finding the right balance between motivation and ability. And he pointed out that quite often when we design products or workflows, because we are very much invested in what we're doing, and we have this innate bias where we assume that we are the users. And so we feel that the users are also very highly motivated, which in many cases isn't true. And that's why we sometimes create overly complex workflows or products, because with the high level of motivation that we have, they can be used very easily. But when someone with lesser motivation tries to use them, they realize it requires too much on the ability axis, and that's where these products fail. So he promoted the idea of trying to simplify our products and require less abilities so they can be successfully used even when we have lower motivation level. And he broke it down into the 6 elements of simplicities that can be looked at and considered when we try to make things more simpler, which are time, money, physical effort, mental effort, social deviance. That's a really interesting one because it talks about how we will be perceived by others, or how we think others will perceive us when we do whatever it is that we are asked to do. And of course, doing stuff that's routine or non-routine, which also has to be considered. And well, his work was based on, in part, on the work of this psychology professor, and I really have to try to say the name right. So it's MIHALY CSIKSZENTMIHALYI, and he's Hungarian, and he dedicated his life to the study of happiness and creativity, and came up with some interesting ideas. And this chart that I think at least reminded me a lot of BJ Fogg's chart here. And the idea is that when you do something that you're good at and is interesting to you, you are in a state of flow. That's how we called it. And to achieve the state of flow, you need to find, or to bring your users to a state of flow, you need to find the right balance between skills, which is what Fogg referred to as ability, and challenge, which is, again, what was in Fogg's diagram, the motivation. So if you can manage the right proportion of requirement for skill and challenge, you will bring your users to this flow channel or flow zone. And this will just be a mental place where they feel very good in what they're doing in that moment. And it doesn't have to be something that you go into for the whole day. It can be even if you just manage to bring your users to the flow channel for a few seconds or minutes, then obviously you've done a very good job, and they'll be very happy to stay with your product or use it again. So that's just another way of looking at this behavior forming strategy. And then there's EYAL, which again, if you haven't heard of him, I recommend definitely looking him up and reading his book, as I did. And he wrote, he's a behavior designer. That's how he calls himself. And I think he comes from UX design originally. And he wrote a book called Hooked, which in part was the inspiration for this whole webinar. And in his book, he suggests the idea or the model that he calls the hook model, which basically takes all the things we talked about until now about behavior and habit forming, and finding the right way to implement them in your products or services. And then basically, so what he called the hook is a place, and this is something that we're not going to do now, but that's like the next level, where you can look at whatever it is that you're doing and identify places in it where you can, elements that you can use as hooks. So it has to have a trigger that leads to the user doing some kind of action, which is rewarded in, well, I assume in a positive way, and makes the user wants to invest more the next time they see the trigger. And then what was interesting to me about his hook model was the understanding the different types of rewards that you can use to motivate your users in the process. And so he talked about three main types of rewards, which are the rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. And I think the most common example for the rewards of the tribe would be social platforms like Twitter or Facebook, where you post something, and then if many people give it a like or retweet it or whatever, you feel good about it because you feel you get the affirmation from people. Sometimes even not even people that you know, but you still feel good about them liking what you posted because it feels good. That's the reward of the tribe. And then there's the reward of the hunt, which is when you find something that is of high value or that makes you feel good about yourself. For instance, I was, when I'm bored at home, I'll just go on YouTube and look for old music videos of 1970s singers and bands, and I get very happy when I find something that I can actually recognize. So, and then if I share that on my channel or send links to my friends on WhatsApp, that's something that is rewarding to me. That's a reward of the hunt. And of course, reward of the self is when you, let's say, manage to clean out your inbox, reply and archive and delete everything there, and it's empty and clean, and you feel very efficient, very effective. Or if you go running and you use one of those exercise apps where they congratulate you when you improve your performance, and then you can share it again with your friends and get both the reward of the self and the reward of the tribe. Some apps like Strava will do that for you. And then he also talks a little bit about how to approach, how to identify the hook and then pick the right action for it and think of how it will be rewarding. So when you do want to apply this model on your product, you have to first understand what could be the trigger for the habit that you want to form. And the interesting thing here, I think, is talking about what he called vitamins versus painkillers, and that's a bit of an arbitrary grouping, but it makes sense in a way, where he talked about things that are just nice to have or fun, but really don't carry a lot of value in comparison to things that will actually be important. And again, that depends a lot on the context. For instance, if you're building a game, then I don't think there'll be any painkillers there, because it's the sole purpose of it is to be fun. But when you're designing professional tools or learning for that matter, then it matters a lot that you give real value to your users. So of course, that I guess takes you more to the side of painkillers rather than vitamins. And then there's the question of what action you expect your user to do. And if you go back to what BJ Fogg was suggesting, then, excuse me, action can be something very small and simple. So when you go on Twitter, for instance, an action could be scrolling through your feed, or clicking on favoring something, clicking the little heart icon, liking something. That would be something that requires very little effort and cost almost nothing. But of course, there's a social aspect when you sometimes find yourself liking something that maybe you misunderstood and will make you look not in a good light with your friends or online friends. Like, you know what I mean? You always have to be careful on not giving the wrong impression. So that's also something to consider. And then the reward, of course, is however, how will the user be rewarded for the action that they took? And if you manage to find the right combination of a hook, the following action, and the reward for it, then your product will just become a little more appealing for the users, and they will maybe have to use it because it's a work tool, but they will definitely enjoy using it more. And this is, I think, what where the benefit is for us as creators or designers or people that build things. And yeah, so now again, you can look at these products and services, the ones that you're using, and maybe have a better understanding on where these techniques were applied in them and how they affect you as users. And yeah, that was it. I hope you learned something new and valuable. And the recording and will be available later on our on Totara community. And again, we can have deeper conversation on your questions on our forum later on. So thank you all for being here today. Hope you enjoyed it. Dee, dee, dee.